So we'll start with our usual prayer for teacher and student. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astuma Vidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both and our studies. May we work together with great energy. May we, our study, lead to illumination. May we not unnecessarily argue with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is a question-answer session, and we try to make it as informal as possible. Invariably, the session can have some very interesting questions or end up in a kind of a blank. So let's see if you have some questions. I'm going to mute my microphone while you formulate your questions.
Swamiji, I have a question. And it's in relation to routine and practice. So recently I've been doing quite a bit of travel, and I've just found that on my travel, not that I've forgotten, but I've obviously broken with routine, which I have at home. And I found myself, when I came back home, it probably took me 24 hours or maybe 48 hours just to get back into my routine again. And what I mean by that is my meditation, my thoughtfulness, all of that. So just want to talk a little bit about how to address that going forward, because I have more travels coming, and I just found, I won't say I was discombobulated, but I didn't realize how important the routine was when I was at home in a familiar setting. So perhaps you might just talk a little bit about that as we travel or we're in different locations, and routine, how perhaps improve that or help it or encourage it. That's my question.
Well, coincidentally, I've also been traveling, and my routine has also been shaken up. So I understand the problem. See, the purpose of having a routine is actually pranayama. Pranayama, the control of the flow of energy. This is universal energy. It doesn't belong to us in particular. Of course, we claim it for our own. So what we are trying to do in all our spiritual activities is control the mind. Now, the mind requires 1,000 tools to control it. And it's been compared in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Katha to be an arrangement. Let's say that the body is the chariot. That's the analogy. And then you have a charioteer, and then you have the reins, and then you have horses. So we have to understand probably the nature of the mind itself to understand how do we control it, because whether we are out of routine, which happens out of necessity from time to time, or whether we're in the routine, we have to see the dangers on both sides. What are the dangers of having a routine? The dangers are taking it for granted, being blasé, taking it for granted, so that it becomes so habitual, it becomes meaningless. That's the one extreme. Then what about the other extreme, where we are so much out of routine that we don't even do anything that normally would be within our routine? That's the other extreme. We have to have in both cases a nice balance. And so we have to understand what is the purpose of all of this anyway. The purpose of it is to control the body-mind complex, particularly the mind. The mind is the queen bee of everything else. Where the mind goes, the whole thing goes. So the analogy of a chariot with the charioteer being that evaluating, estimating, executing faculty in the mind. We call this buddhi, intellect. And then the reins act as a connection between that and the organs. According to the Sankhya Yoga psychology, the mind is comprised of the sense organs, internal sense organs. Internal sense organs means this. We have the external sense organs. We can see eyes, ears, and so on and so forth that we know on the outer edge of the skin. And we often mistake these for the absolute sense organs. No, they're just the outer ones. We can describe them as the outer ones connected with the outer things. And then there are the internal organs. When the outer organs shut off, the internal organs are still alive and well. And they come out as imagination, daydreaming, night dreaming, etc. And we can have many, many adventures. And when we go to sleep, we glide across the border from waking to dream, hardly even noticing. So these are the internal organs that have to be controlled. We have to control our imagination. And then we have to control these components in our mind, which give us so many different things: doubts, fears, temptations. And so we have to train ourselves to see the ultimate principle that we call God when these things arise, when temptation and fear and doubt come up. You have to get rid of them. Now, how do you get rid of them? You see, the problem is all the fragments that we have to deal with. Fragments meaning, let's say, difficulties and obstacles that we encounter in our daily life. These are not mistakes, they are supposed to be there. So upset in your routine is probably supposed to be there if it's part and parcel of your life. So they're the fragments. Of course, other fragments will be there tomorrow in different forms as well. And what we are only doing is recognizing reaction to the fear, the fighting of the fragments, dealing with the fragments. How we deal with them is more important than sustaining a routine, because the two things are interdependent. When we say routine, and we mean dedicated spiritual practice where we sit down at the same time every day, this is good. It gets us into a habit. But without the capacity to deal with the fragments in your normal working, waking life, in the normal 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever it is of your waking state, then when you sit down for your meditation and japa, they will come in. All these fragments will start demanding attention, pulling your attention, pulling the mind here and there and everywhere. And then you say, I don't know, I sit down, my whole mind is disturbed. Why? Because as soon as I sit down, all these fragments as problems and difficulties start coming in. And then what to do about them? So trying to meditate is a big obstacle in itself. We shouldn't do it. But you see, engaging in a routine that is well rehearsed, that is a certain amount of ritual, these things you know anyway. You light a lamp or a candle, you light an incense stick, you place a flower, you maybe in the evening circulate the lamp around a picture or symbol of your deity. And then preparing the seat. You make sure that the seat is blessed. What does it mean? Something sacred is going to happen there. You have an attitude toward it which says, this is a sacred seat. Nobody can just go and sit on it. You know, when we have events here, and I'm not at the ashram, I'm somewhere else, I have to tell people, hey, you know, if you're all rearranging the furniture for a public function, make sure nobody throws my meditation seat here and there. Please preserve it in a special place. because all my vibrations are there, and all my the sacredness of the activity that is done on the seat. This is a sacred thing. It's a sacred object. Please carefully put it in a special place. Don't throw it here and there. Oh, it's just a cushion. Now, the Zen Buddhists, by the way, they know this. So when they approach their seat for meditation, and they have a special form of that seat, they stand, first of all, they stand in front of it erect. And then they bend their knees and they do a prostration. Then they get up. It is something like the Muslim salat in the mosque. Then they do it again, and then they arrange their seat nicely. But what they're doing is they're prostrating to the seat itself. So all of these little things prepare the mind for some sacred activity where we sit and we have barriers then against the disturbing reactions to the fragments. It's not the fragments that are a problem. It's our reactions to them that are the problem. They'll always beat you if you try and fight with them. Don't fight them. Don't reject them either. They're not a danger to you. You put positive thoughts in at the same time and tune into the totality. So it's the tuning into the totality that's the important thing. Whether you're traveling, whether you are in a different time zone, whether your routine is upset so that you cannot take advantage of these special times of day or the special shrine in which you sit. But you see, this tuning in is the important thing. And whatever range we tune into or see, such as worry, fear, and anxiety, if we tune into that, well, those things will be supplied to us in great, great abundance. So the current we don't tune into, that's also there. So we have to program ourselves to something positive. And if it's not possible to adopt our normal routine, then we have to adapt. You know, there's a famous saying, adopt, adapt, improve. A Young Man's Association has that motto, adopt, adapt, improve. What is the secret of our survival? Is because we had to adopt something, we had to adapt something, and then we had to improve. And without that threefold process, there's no growth that happens. So we have to try and recognize our divinity in every person in front of us, every article that we use, everything that frightens you. You will not be free of fear if you don't do that. So unless you recognize that, then fear or doubt or disturbance in the mind will dominate. We have to train ourselves to see all this when fear and doubt and all these negative things come to us. We have to train the mind to do that. So more importantly, routine is good, but if it's out of necessity, not being able to follow, that doesn't mean that we stop the tuning. But knowing the danger of going out of routine, we have to increase the tuning and we have to adapt so that our routine, instead of happening at a certain time, we now replace it and put it at a different time or possibly even a different place. So supposing you are told, please, at minimum, go and do japa and meditation twice daily, morning and evening. Supposing you cannot do it at the same time, well, there are other opportunities. Before going to bed, you can do it. Even if that's not possible, you can lie in the bed and do it. And if that's not, there's always a way. And the important thing is to notice when our attention goes out of tune and bring it back and make sure that it is positively tuned. So some preliminaries, of course, to all the spiritual life will be this, what we call this Kriya Yoga. Now the term has been misunderstood in various kinds of systems. But Kriya really means that it means literally working towards this unity that we call yoga. Uniting the attention or concentration requires a certain preparation. We call this work Kriya Yoga, and it is threefold, and it is contained and elaborated on in the second limb, as it were, of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, 8 limbs, called Niyama. And we can say that it is, you see, Tapa, Swadhyaya, goes on like that. See, Tapaha means mortification is translated like that, but really what it means is, it means controlling this chariot, controlling the senses. Imagine now this example of this chariot. You're sitting in there, and the horses are not trained properly, and they all want to go in, let's say, 10 different directions. Supposing you have 10 horses. You have 10 sense organs, 5 dedicated to incoming information, and 5 dedicated to actioning whatever the mind demands. Or if it's uncontrolled, just go where it pleases. You see, horses have ears and eyes. And when they see something, they want to run after it. That's why some horses, well, in racehorsing, you have to put blinkers on horses so their attention is not distracted by what they see or what they hear. A dog is always alert to some disturbance, and its ears will pick something up, and then its reaction is to start barking. Well, this reaction in the human being has to be controlled. That's called tapaha. Tapaha, that discipline which says that I will control what I eat, I'll control what I drink, I'll control what I look at, I'll control what I hear, and what I touch, what I taste, all the senses. I will give them restrictions. I'll put them on something like a diet. Quite difficult for the number 7s probably, I'm not sure. Put them all on a diet. Strengthen the will. And the will stands for the intellect. When the intellect exerts its strength, then the intellect starts developing more, learns how to be assertive, learns how to control things properly. So that has to be done. There has to be some evaluation which says, some estimating principle that is able to decide, this is better than that. And then plan a course of action. And that planning function is actually part and parcel of the flow of divine grace coming through to you. So holding on to the reins, the mind itself, controlling the reactions. It's mainly the reactions. We can't control what comes into us. We can only control what goes out. And what goes out, of course, we can control to some extent what comes in. We can restrict some of it, keeping good company, for example. If you're an alcoholic, then you should not go into a drinking area. So there are some things that can be controlled. If you have a difficult person, well, the best course of action is to try to avoid them. But if that's inevitably impossible, then try and find a way of dealing with them. And the primary way of dealing with anybody and anything, all these fragments, will be seeing the divinity in there, seeing God there. So as soon as we do that, then the mind adjusts nicely. And even though we may be out of routine, we are still being mindful. We are still practicing the presence of the divine. Brother Lawrence's formula, practicing the presence. That much you can do. And knowing the danger maybe of being out of routine, we can intensify that connection so that when we are able to pick up the routine again, it becomes very easy and very natural. I can take my own case as an example, where if I travel, then I get out of routine. different place, different time zone, and also, maybe some areas of tiredness can come in and so on, and all of these factors can come in. And so you might, not be in routine. You might be way out of your routine. But that doesn't stop the mind from being connected. And so that connection means that when you go back into a situation where you pick up your normal routine again, it becomes very easy and natural. Being away in France, for example, there's a 1 hour difference. But as soon as I came back here, first night back, 3 o'clock I awoke. 3 is equivalent to 4 in France. And then the second night I brought it back, so now it's 4 o'clock. Now it's steadily 4 o'clock. And then to get back into that routine is wonderful. It's like visiting, you see, being away, visiting somebody, and then coming back. The value of the visit is you have an extra chance to see God in another person, in another situation, in another place. Maybe the place is more beautiful, a more beautiful environment to what you're used to. In which case, that gives you extra spiritual value. As I mentioned before we started here, I was in Evian, and it was a beautiful place, and my host lives so that when you step out of the front door, the Alps are there immediately in front of you. What a beautiful place, what a beautiful scenario. And so, this is how we deal with it. We try to live up to some kind of routine, even if the routine has to change, but we still maintain the basics. And we certainly maintain the tuning connection. So that is what I would say. This Kriya Yoga consists of this mortification, this tapa, this discipline. And then there is study, sudhaya. Study means not just studying novels or anything like that, but studying those works. And these days, it also can be things on YouTube or other media where we have the capacity to learn about the liberation of the soul. Now, this learning, we have to be careful. It doesn't mean that we pick up controversial studies. It's nothing to do with intellectual gymnastics. It is to do with endorsing and enforcing the principles so that we never forget. And principally, we have to always remember the basis of our own divinity. So the only studies we should take up and intensify for a re-endorsement and re-underlining our own convictions. There are two things, one we call Vada and one we call Siddhanta. But this is two types of scriptural knowledge that we can pick up. So Vada is argumentative. We don't have to go very far to get involved in an argument on religion. We start off as a discussion, and then somebody gets hot-headed, and then we get hot-headed in return, and then it's more like a boxing match. And if there's a debate, the debate has no value because, unless it's a constructive discussion involved in it, because the two sides are not interested in understanding the other point of view or compromise. The nature of debate is stand in your corner and make your points, and every other point that comes, you come and hit back with your own point. This kind of dialectic discussion disturbs the mind. And we can see currently the whole series of debates going on today in the Occidental world, the Western world, with religion versus science and creation versus evolution and all kinds of things going on. But it only serves to unsettle the mind. Siddhanta, on the other hand, that is much more decisive. Siddhanta is intensifying that form of study, knowing that this argumentative side is finished with. And it is a decisive thing. It is arriving at a conclusion that we already know of. We don't have to be convinced of anything. We already know it. But we're simply deepening it. We're arriving at the conclusion, and that alone is not enough. It must be intensified. The number of books are infinite in number, and time is short. So the secret of knowledge is to take what only is essential to us. That's why when we do these, Enneagram and Essence of Truth, I put Vedanta, what do I put as the essence of truth? We don't have to go into the details. We can go right down to rock bottom, the essence of truth. I always say, the most ancient psychologists that we know of, I ask the question, and some people say, oh, maybe it was Freud and maybe it was somebody else. No, the most ancient must be Krishna. And Krishna is dealing with Arjun, somebody who is suffering from a nervous breakdown. What's the evidence of it? He can't hold his bow. He's shaking. Tears are flowing. He's confused. All these symptoms of complete nervous breakdown. What does Krishna do? He doesn't say, okay, my child, please lie down on the battlefield. We'll make some cushions for you. I'll bring out my pad and a pen. Please tell me all about your childhood. Tell me how you suffered. Tell me how your mother was cruel to you and your father was an alcoholic and all of these things. Not at all. There's no lying down. He says, stand up. Be courageous. Get some inherent strength that you already have. Stand up and fight. Where has this mean-mindedness come from? All this cowardice. You're a coward. Now that seems really harsh these days in terms of psychotherapy, when you're supposed to say, okay, tell me all about it. I'll listen. I promise not to fall asleep. I'll charge you an exorbitant fee, and even when you pause, I'll still keep charging. And please come back next week, and the week after we'll have a series. And your time is up now, but next week you can come. And then there's a perpetual fee being generated. No, not like that. Not weakening a person by reviewing all the things, the negative things of the past. No, and don't even look at the future. Right here, right now, is your formula for overcoming every kind of fear or every kind of psychological disturbance when you assert your inherent strength, and it's equivalent to asserting your inner nature. Straight away it goes to the essence, the essential thing. You are the Atman. What is the Atman? You are the quintessential self, and that is one with the universal self. There are no two, by the way. And when you peel off all the layers of body and energetic layer and everything else, when you peel away all of these layers, 5 layers, the Taittiriya Upanishad tells us, when you peel all of that away, you're left with the shining, the immortal. And when you assert that, all your fears and doubts get transcended. And they all change, because there is no more positive attitude that you can bring to your working field of experience. And all of that will transform all the various waves and frequencies, the vibrations which are there that we call fragments or our universe or our experience. So we have to change our thinking. So this is the other thing. And then, of course, the other component is dedicating the fruits of your activities, dedicating it to the author whose energy we're using, making every activity holy. That we have to do. So Swami Vivekananda gives us a wonderful commentary on this Kriya Yoga, by the way. He breaks it down like this. He breaks it down in terms of our obstacles. Well, our obstacles are called kleshas, and the mother of all the obstacles would be ignorance. What is ignorance? Does it mean we never went to university or got an education? No, that's not what is meant. What is meant is mistaking something, mistaking this world to be absolutely real and changing and permanent, and it's not. There are no permanent habitats anywhere. So there's a cause of egoism. Now we study egoism, self-image, the Enneagram personalities and what have you. Summarized is egoism, and it's not standard. It's different for everybody. And from there comes attachment and aversion and clinging to life. These are the various kleshas or obstacles. And he says these impressions exist in different states. They're sometimes dormant, and you often hear the expression innocent as a baby. Yet in the baby may be the state of a demon or of a god, which will come out by degrees. Now, in the yogi, what do we mean by the yogi? Some remote person, some person we can't identify with? No, a yogi is you. We are yogis struggling for yoga. These impressions, these samskaras, left by past actions, they're attenuated, that is, exist in a very fine state. And the person who can control them, not allow them to become manifest or overpowered, means that sometimes one set of impressions is held down for a while by those that are stronger. But they come out when that repressing cause is removed. And the last state is the expanded, when the samskaras having helpful surroundings attain to a great activity, either as good or evil. Now he says this ahead of the next sutras to dealing with ignorance and egoism and defining them. But basically, what he's saying is that we have to control these various kleshas. When we control these various things one by one, starting with knowledge, dealing with egoism, making the ego an open channel for divine grace to flow instead, when we are dealing with all of these things, then every time we remove an obstacle, we are closer to a real understanding, a truthful understanding, and peace of mind. That is called spirituality. And a little bit of work is necessary in terms of this Kriya Yoga. So the only thing necessary is to train the intellect. What is the use of disturbing it for nothing? The intellect is just a weak instrument and can give us only knowledge, limited by the senses. So the yogi wants to go beyond the senses. Therefore, intellect is of no use to that person. He is certain of this and therefore is silent and does not argue. Every argument throws his mind out of balance, creates a disturbance in the chitta. This is in terms of this swadhyaya, this study aspect. And then there are much higher things beyond them. The whole of life is not for schoolboy fight and so on and so forth. Surrendering the fruits of work to God is to take to ourselves neither credit nor blame, but to give both up to the Lord and be at peace. What disturbs our peace? When we take credit or blame for something, because this stems from our egoistic position. I did this, I did not do that. I regret I did not do this, but I'm happy I did that. Well, there's nothing to do with you. Make yourself instrumental and see what happens. So at least before you go to sleep, even if your routine is disturbed, at least you can do that much. Oh, these are all the activities that were done. And now they belong to you. I'm giving them back to you. And please wake me up in the morning so that I can just be your instrument again. And an instrument is a non-complaining thing. I never heard my computer complain. I heard it went on a strike a few times, of course. But I never heard it say, okay, I'm giving up. So an instrument, something which is instrumental, belongs to something else, some user, independent of it. And if I can acknowledge that what I call a mind, what I call intellect, what I call a body, combined, this is an instrument comprising internal, external, and I dedicate all the results. So I'm not worried. It leaves me free from concern about results. It leaves me free from anxiety. So these are just some thoughts in relation to your question. And I don't know if I answered it fully, but you can let me know.
Yes, Swamiji, thank you very much. Very comprehensive answer.
Good. Well, we have time for some more questions then. And while I'm talking, this is more of a discussion format. So while I'm talking, feel free to butt in if you like. It doesn't matter. It's okay. See, if you just leave me to talk and talk and talk, you won't get a chance. There was a devotee who visited me this afternoon was saying, I hanker for those days when we were in Blessington Street. Of course, this was pre-COVID and so on, where we would have really sincere seekers sitting down earnestly, discussing, asking questions and so on. And they weren't afraid, of course, to interrupt. And he was saying, I miss those days. I said, well, those days can be here because on Wednesdays and Sundays, we have the opportunity for doing that. Even on Tuesdays, sometimes we budget some time for comments and questions. But these are times when we can sit down with a cup of tea, as it were, relax a little bit, and try to explore issues together. That's the purpose of these sessions. And these sessions don't, the content doesn't take as much as this Zoom business because it's broken by sips of tea. See? And I'm not sure why people are not visiting. I'm giving this talk over Zoom. Some of you, of course, are not in the country. Some of you are in Belgium or France or UK or whatever it is. But many of you are here in Dublin. And yet, I'm speaking in a hall which is absolutely empty. Of course, the Lord's presence is here, but it didn't used to be like that, I think COVID had some effect, but the usefulness and otherwise is that we resorted to things like this, Zoom, and so on. And so I think people say, oh, it's all right, I'll listen on Zoom. I don't have to travel and so on. Not understanding that there's a great richness in dialogue and exchange. See, we have to take it that if our work or circumstances takes us away from routine, there's really nothing we can do about it in terms of what we have to do. But then there's nothing to stop us rearranging things a little bit, just temporarily,
Yeah, so Swamiji, how do we? I mean, that's a good question, I think, for everybody. So how do we get back together in person? How come we have all drifted? Because I have found myself doing a lot more activity on Zoom. Now, the last few weeks I've got out and I've started to meet people, and I find it more invigorating. And sorry, I'm talking through my nose here because I've got a cold. But
okay.
How do we get back to the routine of meeting people? Because we have potentially the challenge of not wanting to say what we want on a Zoom call that's been recorded on YouTube. Sorry, that's just second question.
Well, I mean, in some cases, it's much more convenient in routine things. So, for example, in business issues, if you want a conference at your work, it's probably much more economic to have it on a Zoom call. But supposing you have to consult with a person in terms of plans, and don't forget, part of communication is body language. And so if we are doing this by remote, we're actually taking away some essential components of communication. And I realized this when we tried to do courses online. We had no other option during COVID. That those people who attended courses online, they themselves will tell you that they didn't get the full value of the course. And so it is in informal interactions, social interactions. I think the most reasonable thing is to discriminate and decide under what circumstances should I interact through, let us say, this media of webinar or what have you. And in what case do I find it absolutely essential for one-on-one personal interactions? And then to see whether there is sufficient reason not to interact with people person on person. I think particularly teachers have found it difficult. You know, in the COVID, it was difficult for teachers, school teachers, say, or university professors, to effectively deliver lessons online. It sounds like a great idea. Nobody has to travel and all the rest of it. But then somebody can blank the screen off. Or, or if the conversation is uninteresting, they can go away and have a cup of tea and come back and blank their video off. So there are some traps involved, and I think we have to, like any other technology, use the technology to our advantage and use it sensibly. But there's a great danger in terms of isolating oneself completely and not having normal gregarious social activities as we are designed to do and as there's a need to do.
Swami, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I suppose it's something around working with a lot of young people at the moment, and the whole area of transgender is such a prominent part of their lives and a concern for many. And I just wanted to know what you felt about it and how come it seems to be this generation where it's really quite a pertinent and pressing matter for a lot of them.
Well, I don't want to dive into something so controversial, except to say, generally, see, it is a fad nowadays to bring minority issues as majority issues. Statistically, transgender people comprise, as far as I understand, something like 0.01% of world populations. It's not a major issue. People being handicapped is much more a major issue, but nobody's talking about it. Refugees are a much more major issue. So I think we have brought into our environment of awareness an issue which is a non-issue. Now, if you ask me this question, I have to deal with it on a number of different levels. You see, the advantage of Vedanta is we're not interested in gender at all. And you know, I am 50% male, and 50% female, 50% male and 50% female. My father was a male and my mother was a female. But you see, from the Vedanta point of view, we're not interested in gender because at the root is Atman. And what we call about these gender issues and so on and so forth is all in a dream-like state which we call waking. And it's going to disappear. And none of us will be discussing it in the next, let's say, 50, 60 years, because we won't be here. So I think there is a social pressure to put minority issues as majority issues and create unnecessary worry and anxiety over something which is really not a great issue. Supposing somebody makes the issue as a choice issue, then it's a false issue. And even let's say homosexuality or lesbianism or what have you, I think there's no conclusive or there's no conclusion to say what is the cause, but we're, as Vedantins, accepting of the whole thing because gender is not an issue for us. Now, there are people who have a tendency toward being male because they're female and being female because they're male. And I think, personally speaking only, that there may well be evidence to do with 9 months of pregnancy where hormonal imbalances can take place. And I'm basing this on research that is being done on monkeys. That when you increase testosterone or estrogen or one of these two, then you get more male behavioral characteristics, or more female behavioral characteristics. But the point is that supposing in my last life I was fed up with being a female, and I felt I should assert myself as a male, then maybe in my next life the gender will change, and we're quite happy with that. The difficulty doesn't come into that. The difficulty comes in when you present it as a choice, that you can choose to be masculine or feminine as you want. And that, I think, is a false issue. Now, don't quote me on this because I'm just giving you my personal opinion, but the Vedanta position you can quote me on. You see, we are all the Atman. We have no gender issue or standpoint. And we value everybody. We don't care. But if somebody is confused over their sexuality and it's presented as a choice issue, then I think that is a false issue. Now, we are living in a society that may well see it like this. We're living in a society where transgender issues have risen in people's minds from whatever it is, 0.1%, possibly less, 0.1% to 100%, and made it one of the central issues. But I can assure you, it's not a central issue in Africa, and it's not a central issue in many Asian countries or South American countries. It seems to be an American and European difficulty.
Thanks, Swami.
But you see, my question back to you is, by way of explanation in terms of your question, the people that you're dealing with, how has it arisen as an issue, as a fearful issue for them or a disturbing issue?
Well, Swami, it's more to do with some of them are already going through a transition physically and are taking...
What proportion?
Well, I'm only talking about some that I see. So I don't know the proportions, but I'm just saying in my practice. And I just, it's such a massive trauma for the body to go through those sorts of changes. I just was curious what you're feeling.
From that point of view, yes. Yes. I mean, from that point of view, there are psychological implications, there are physical implications, absolutely, yes. And how do we deal with that? We deal with that in the same way that we deal with any psychosocial issues and problems. And we go to the base. And I think one of the difficulties is, you see, I attended a conference on mental health. And one of the lecturers, or one of the speakers, I shouldn't say lecturer, one of the speakers was bringing up a question. in psychotherapy, should the psychotherapist mention the word God? Should you ask a question? Do you believe in God or not? And he was asking this for a specific reason, because the norm is you leave the subject well alone. And I immediately replied, and I said, yes, of course. But you see, because it depends then, once the question is answered, you now have a basis for a counseling approach. Supposing you say, do you believe in any kind of God? And a person says no. Then your approach will be entirely different. But if a person says yes, well, then there's a question of faith comes up and various other approaches can come up. So you can modify your approach there, but you won't know if you don't ask the question. And the only reason why these questions are not being asked is that it is considered to be apolitical to ask such a question. It's deemed to be extremely taboo. Politics and religion are taboo. And that's okay. To some extent, we don't go around talking about these things unnecessarily. But by the same token, if there is a therapeutic basis, so you see there was some very interesting conversations with psychologists and Jungian psychologists, and I think it was Krishnamurti. And as I mentioned previously, you see, Krishna did not say, please lie down and tell me, go into your past, dig it all up, and commiserate endlessly on it. And I put this down to an Abrahamic tradition that starts off with a deficit, that we are in need of salvation. And it's actually not so much an Abrahamic situation as much as it's a theological position, a Christian theological position that puts this original sin there, so that we have no hope whatsoever of raising ourselves out of it. And so I brought this up with a number of, when we have dialogues with interfaith dialogues and so on and so forth. And I often bring this point up, that there's a difference between, let us say, dharmic religions and this approach, which puts us in a deficit position, a weak position, and the only way out of it is a begging, and that we be raised up out of it. But the dharmic position is entirely different. We don't view it like that. We don't view it from the point of an empty pot, an empty barrel containing nothing or any holes to be patched. We say we are full and free and perfect. We are fullness itself. Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamadachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. There is only fullness there. Now we have enough of seeing it as defective and difficult and struggling. But we don't have to see it in this way. And this is the advantage of Vedanta, that gives you the possibility of shifting your position to get around a problem in reality. Once we understand that what we are seeing is a superimposition on a reality, and our fundamental nature is already glorious and full and free and immortal and infinite, we don't have to ask for strength, we already have it. We don't have to ask for salvation, there's nothing to be saved from. We can assert ourselves in this way. And so we can choose one of three positions. And the other positions would be, there's some merit in them. If I want to cultivate more intensive devotion, then I have to recognize a superior being that my behavior and character does not currently match up to. But I don't necessarily have to stay there. I can equally glide across that to another solution and assert my glory. And this is what Krishna does and gets Arjun out of his depression. His severe mental state is dealt with upfront, boldly, decisively. And then 18 chapters are there, or another several chapters are there after that. Second chapter, from second chapter onwards, is there to expound this and show how you can do it. But the basis is there. The basis is you are the Atman, you're the immortal self. That's the basis. And then you build up from there. So it's a top-down approach, not a bottom-up approach. We have to climb up. No, we can stand there, we can sit on God's throne if we like, remembering that we are made in the image and likeness of God or the divine. Assert ourselves from there when the need arises. So last night I was talking about non-dualism being part of your toolbox that we can use. When things get tough and difficult, that is where we can stand. In other places, other circumstances, we can stand in different places. We can stand in our individuality and struggle a little bit, and it's fine. That's a tool as well, no doubt. But then when things get difficult, there's an all-purpose, multi-purpose tool that we can use. And that is our non-dualism. It doesn't remove us from the reality. It actually engages us in life in a different way. And now we're able to say, well, if there's only one without a second, then how do we account for all the fragmented things in front of us? These are various scenes, like scenes in a play. And we now, with a sporting attitude, a certain joy, a certain delight, engage joyfully in the drama and play our part well. If life is a game and we are the players, then let us play the game well, to the best of our ability. And a sense of adventure. This goal in this way is called abhaya, total fearlessness. We face the world and the world crumbles and the fragments disappear magically because we have asserted the unity of existence and there's nobody else at home. All right, good.
Yeah. So the question is it's indeed one. It's like in a form of a story, like
yes.
So there is a cat basically that is going from house to house basically. So like a natural way of living for a cat, cat going, in inside house and in the wild as well. And well, in the wild, in the in nature. So so the question is the following: so when this cat one day obviously goes to the house of a neighbor and is gibbling a bit, so problem at the leg, and therefore the neighbor, the loving neighbor in this story, see this gibbling cat animal suffering, and therefore goes to the neighbor and say, yeah, this cat is suffering. He has it's visible that there is some suffering in this cat, and therefore the neighbor is advised, and seeing this suffering, if the neighbor does not react, so obviously does not go to the veterinary, so there is the cat is still suffering. So that's the question: what can one do, even if he has love, tremendous love for animal world, compassion? He tries to do good. He goes to the neighbor and goes like, okay, so there is a need, there is a suffering. and therefore even with love, he goes and he said, okay, do some action, but what else can one do if the neighbor does not work?
I assume that this cat is not Schrodinger's cat. Postulated a thought experiment.
Oh yeah.
You see, because in quantum physics, the existence of a cat
Mhm.
is only there when we look at it. When we don't look at it, it's no longer there. It's held in a state of superposition. Now, there's a reason why I say that, by the way. Of course, he postulated the thought experiment that if you put the cat in the box and then you have a capsule, cyanide capsule, and you make an arrangement so that that is released, then actually the cat is half dead and half alive, and it's in a state of superposition. And only when you open the box will it either be alive or dead. So he postulated this to show the absurdity of this superposition idea or solution to a certain problem that is called the wave-particle duality. Anyway, put it this way. You see, we have to do what we can out of compassion, but subjective morality is exactly that. It's a question of weighing up what gives everyone the greatest strength in our activities, and we have to make an individual decision about it. Now, you wouldn't want to end a life unnecessarily, but you would want to end suffering. And it helps to know that when, supposing you end the cat's life, it's not the end of a life. And then if you are able to take it and patch it up and do something for it, and you end its suffering and it still lives, well, that's a good decision also. But the point is that every individual case will have an individual solution and not a general one. And this is part of weighing up a moral dilemma which wants to do the best in all the circumstances. And sometimes a hard decision has to be made from the human standpoint. And then you see a cat is suffering. Now, supposing there's a human that goes with the cat, because this is a supposing story, and I can only give a supposing answer. So supposing a person goes along with the cat and also is suffering in one leg, and you have to choose a priority to save the human life or the cat's life. My question back to you is, which one would you do? Unfortunately, hypothetical questions require hypothetical answers. So hypothetically, what would you do?
Save both. Hypothetically, obviously, like.
Yes, supposing you could only save one.
Oh, that's a dilemma. Therefore, that's a dilemma. Well, that's a good one, because would I blame the neighbor? Because or would I, because yeah, in this story that's the owner is the neighbor, so therefore one is obviously caring for the cat, but the ownership is from the neighbor, so it's the neighbor's responsibility. So I would say I would save the cat, but the neighbor as well. So I would have a very dilemma. So because obviously we know.
So let me tell you, I would have no dilemma about it. Now, Swami Vivekananda, when he returned to India, he was approached by a welfare society that saved cows.
Oh.
And they asked him, please, will you contribute money toward these suffering cows? towards saving their lives. Since cows in India are sacred and like domestic animals, they're like a cat. And Swami Vivekananda angrily replied, "You see, there are so many millions of people here, and you want to save cattle life rather than save human life. I'd rather save the human life. Because the human life has more possibilities. The human life is on the advanced pilgrimage road for liberation. And the most compassionate thing we can do is give somebody or suggest to somebody or open the way for somebody's freedom. Because that's an enduring result. Why would we want a person to suffer? Because a person is suffering in this life. If we don't attend to that liberation, and the person has another life, they'll be suffering in another life, another life, another life, forever and ever. Surely to get somebody out of that is the highest possible charitable thing we could ever do. The highest, the most compassionate thing we could ever do. And saving a life comes last on the list. Now, I have to tell you about the cat. I am told the cat has 9 lives at least. So they say.
Mm.
You see, this emphasis on birth and life and death is part of our mistake. What is death? We close the eyes and we're gone. And it's a continuous journey. And there's no such thing as death. You can't give me any example of it, only a transformation of form. The waves reconfigure into something else. That's all. But for somebody to get out of this continuous, what we call samsara, this continuous round of birth, life, and death, which inevitably involves suffering. It has to. There's no other way. It involves an altercation between pain and pleasure, pain and pleasure. And we learn much more from the pain. But how to get out of it? So I go back to the example of Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna's job was to rescue Arjuna from his pain. And I think he did it successfully. And in doing that, gave us the clue for the whole of humanity to do it as well. So Krishna saved all our lives, actually. You have to look at things that we call organic life and so on and so forth. We have to, of course, it evokes compassion in us, there's no doubt. You see, if you try to save every being who is suffering on this planet, you'll need more than 1,000 lives to do it. Actually, you'll need over 8 billion lives because 8 billion people are largely suffering. But we're just not in tune with it because we're only aware of our own local business. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, tens of millions of people have died over the years. You hardly even hear it on the news. In Sudan now, people are suffering because of civil stupidity. I mean, civil war, same thing. You find that there are, we haven't really progressed biologically beyond the chimpanzee because the chimpanzee also wars with tribes. And we are doing it as well. And if we're conscious more of our biological nature than our divine nature, we're lost. We have no formula whatsoever. So inside a cat is the divinity. Inside man is a higher divinity in the sense that man is more evolved. And so, therefore, we can more easily see the divinity in man than we can see it in the cat. And we can we can see more divinity even still, in an evolved saintly soul who is full of compassion than a human, than an average human. So it's not really a moral dilemma at all. It's only a moral dilemma if you think that death is the end, either for the cat or the human. But you know, the trouble with hypothetical questions is we can only supply hypothetical answers. So
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.
okay. All right. I'm not sure you're happy with it, but there it is. All right, all good.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's no science can see basically that there is life in everything, in trees, in everywhere. So, it's all living everywhere,
Yes, but not equally.
according to a subjective perspective or the.
No, according to the manifestation of divinity within everything that we see, that we classify as nature. See, a tree has no possibility for freedom in this life. A human has the possibility. It is only with the human body that there's the possibility of ultimate freedom. Manifestation of the divine is more present in the human. It's present in a tree, no doubt, but more manifest. You see, the whole of nature is in a state of unfolding manifestation. And the human being is in a higher state of manifestation, what we call evolution, and a person who is completely selfless and dedicated to the welfare of all beings, we see there an even higher manifestation. We see this divinity more manifest in a Jesus or a Ramakrishna or a Buddha than we see it in an ant. It's still there in an ant, no doubt. The divinity is there in the ant. But we see it more, it's more manifest. So
Swami, that's through the human eye that you said. I suppose, how do we not know that
no, it's
trees?
not through the human eye.
How do we know a tree isn't enlightened?
How well, I don't know. Ask a tree and you'll get the answer. There was a song some time ago. I talk to the trees, but they don't listen to me. Something like that.
I mean, my comment's coming from, there was a really good documentary on the radio yesterday. And it was talking about the intelligence of bees and that they can see certain, I don't know what they termed it, but they can see a lot more than we can see in terms of something to do with ultrasounds, that they're so tuned in, and they're such a fundamental part, we know, of the whole ecosystem, but they know a lot more than we do because they can see certain things that we can't see.
Yes, true. Does that make them liberated or close to liberation? Does that make them able to write poetry or work out the workings, physical workings of the universe? Can they?
How do we not know they're doing that through their signs?
No, the divine is manifesting through their individuality, through their senses. And the senses are not standard senses. We have certain senses. We can't see with what others see, and they cannot see what we see. You can see a shark in an ocean. His whole body is fine-tuned. Fine-tuned, it's the greatest predator in the ocean. Man hasn't got a skin like that, charged with almost like electrodes, a nervous system, highly tuned nervous system. It can detect a prey thousands of miles, well, maybe hundreds of miles away. Does this mean that it is liberated? What is the sign of liberation? So we have to be careful. Sign of liberation is somebody who unselfishly is dedicated to the welfare of all beings, and somebody who is not affected by any pairs of opposites, by hot or cold or praise or blame. Somebody who is able to control the senses fully. Somebody who is able to open up and enter into a world of liberation where they are completely free and not felt to be bound, and every animal feels they are bound. You see, we have been persuaded to put things on their head and look at things from a materialist point of view, purely material point of view. It's a big mistake. Only man has the possibility of transforming discord into harmony. There's no other creature that can do it. There's no creature that will work totally for the service of the welfare of all beings. I know many humans are not like that, but that's their difficulty. The possibility is there in man. And if you don't use that possibility, what a pity. It's equivalent to suicide. The author of the Vivekananda Shudamani makes that point. All good. You have to understand there's a kind of flow. Let's look at a flow theory of evolution where the divine is trying to express itself. Sometimes it expresses itself as a tree, sometimes as a virus, sometimes as a bacteria, sometimes as a mammal, sometimes as an elephant, and as a human also. And then the human has the capacity to consciously, deliberately advance and short circuit their own evolution and become a totally selfless being, dedicated to the welfare of all beings rather than survival and struggle. What a glorious entity. So that a person can come out as a Jesus or a Buddha or a Ramakrishna. What tree could do this? You have to get out of a materialist mindset. Well, we'll end that. Interesting discussion. Thank you for it. We'll close in. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swami.
Swamiji.
Thank you, 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 Swamiji.
Thank you all.